What you're about to see isn't just a tense exchange. It's a rare moment where political theater crashes headfirst into the raw, uncomfortable mechanics of power. Senator Durbin opens this hearing like a man holding receipts, and not just one or two. He walks in with a whole ledger, timelines, resignations, internal memos, and he drops them on the table like bricks. Because what he wants to expose is bigger than a disagreement. It's a pattern.
Mr. Bove, you were deeply involved with the Justice Department's decision to drop federal corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. You were personally involved in this. Multiple federal prosecutors resigned rather than to dismiss the indictment against Mayor Adams. These individuals made it clear that they believe you had engaged in a quid pro quo with Mayor Adams in order to secure his cooperation with President Trump's immigration priorities. Following these resignations, you reportedly held a video call with dozens of attorneys in the Justice Department's Public Integrity section. Do you remember that call?
I do.
Mr. Bove, why did you move forward with this case over the objection of the U.S. Attorney's Office, including the lead prosecutor?
I made a decision, and the department made a decision, to proceed with that motion because it was a determination of the senior leadership of the department that policy reasons made it appropriate to dismiss the charges.
In order to get Mayor Adams to cooperate with President Trump's immigration policy, you were prepared to drop the charges against him?
That's completely false, and I just explained why.
Well, it is not completely false. That's exactly what happened. But the judge foiled your plans with prejudice dismissal of the case. You could no longer have the mayor on a leash, making sure that he follows the president's immigration policies.
Ranking Member Durbin, there's objective evidence in the record in that case that completely refutes the claim you just made.
And there's objective evidence to the contrary. On your call with individuals in the Public Integrity section, did you state, suggest, or imply that the section's career attorneys could be fired if none of them agreed to sign the brief dismissing Mayor Adams' indictment?
No.
Do you know the two individuals who signed the brief?
I do.
Edward Sullivan, one of them?
Yes.
Antoinette Bacon, another?
That's correct.
Did you state, suggest, or imply that any individual who agreed to sign the brief would be rewarded?
I'm sorry, I don't follow the question.
Well, you needed somebody to sign that brief, and those two stepped forward. Was there any suggestion they be treated any differently because of it?
No.
Which attorney, I've already asked this question. Have either of these attorneys been promoted since this occurrence?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Mr. Bove, in January 2022, you co-authored an article for Law 360 in which you described domestic terrorism as, quote, a national security issue. You then cited charges brought against attendees of the August 2017 Unite the Right white supremacist rally in Charlottesville and against members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers relating to the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. You described these prosecutions in the article as, quote, recent examples that illustrate the asymmetry between international terrorism statutes and the patchwork of narrower laws that can be used to address domestic terrorism. Mr. Bove, do you stand by your characterization of the 2017 Unite the Right rally and January 6th as domestic terrorism?
I stand by what I said in the article.
You directed Ed Martin, the failed nominee to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, to fire dozens of line prosecutors who had worked on the January 6th case. You also sought the names of thousands of FBI employees who'd worked on investigations into January 6 rioters, accused these career public servants of, quote, weaponization, close quote, of the FBI. Mr. Bove, did you order the removal of anyone who investigated or prosecuted rioters who assaulted law enforcement officers on January 6?
So, Ranking Member Durbin, with respect to the prosecutors that you just referenced, there was a decision that was made in response to moves by the prior administration to embed temporary assistant United States attorneys who were brought to the district for purposes of the January 6 cases into that office as permanent employees, in many instances after the 2024 election. When I found out about that, I found it to be unacceptable from the perspective of the management of that office and the need for the permanent U.S. attorney put forth by the president and by Attorney General Bondi to manage the office and to staff it. The attorneys that were terminated were on probationary status. I was advised, I did not make this decision alone, that
Mr. Bove, this doesn't square with your own words. I have in my hand here the memorandum that you prepared on January 31st, 2025 to U.S. attorneys and others, in which you made it clear this was about more than provisional employees being dismissed. Let me read what you wrote. In an executive order issued on January 20th, 2025, President Trump appropriately characterized that work as having involved a grave national injustice that's been perpetrated upon the American people over the last 4 years. This is not about provisional employees. It's about January 6 prosecutions. You call them a domestic terrorism event in this article that you have written. Most people, those of us who lived through this ordeal, understand it was such a domestic terrorist event, and now you're trying to have it both ways. You're saying you dismissed the people who prosecuted those who beat up on our law enforcement officers, and it had nothing to do with January 6. Your words defy that.
That's not correct, Ranking Member Durbin, most respectfully, because both things can be true. I did and continue to condemn unlawful behavior, particularly violence against law enforcement. At the same time, I condemn heavy-handed and unnecessary tactics by prosecutors and agents. Both of those things, I submit, are characteristic of these events that
These
we're talking
people
about.
paid for your strategy with their careers. They lost their jobs in the Department of Justice and in the FBI because you identified them as being involved in January 6 prosecution. You cannot call on one hand that prosecution as a grave injustice, as you did in your own memo here, and then on the other hand, tell me how seriously you feel about people assaulting police officers.
I have to disagree again, respectfully, most respectfully. No FBI agents, to my knowledge, were terminated in connection with the list that's referenced in that memo. What I requested was some information about who had participated so that I could begin, and the department could begin a process of reviewing the events to identify whether there were the types of heavy-handed tactics that I just referenced. That process.
I have one last question here. Do you support President Trump's full and unconditional pardon of January 6 rioters who violently assaulted law enforcement officers?
It's not for me to question President Trump's exercise of the pardon power any more than it would be for me to question President Biden's commutation of death sentences or his pardons of drug traffickers.
Before I go to Senator Lee, I'd like to address the quid pro quo allegation head on by entering in.
The center of gravity in this confrontation is a single accusation that a senior figure in the Department of Justice worked to dismiss federal corruption charges against the mayor of the country's largest city, not because the facts demanded it, not because the case collapsed, but because the White House needed political leverage. And when Durbin says quid pro quo, he doesn't say it as a hypothetical. He says it like someone repeating what career prosecutors told him behind closed doors. What makes this moment rare is that Durbin isn't dealing with a vague allegation. He's dealing with the fallout, resignations, objections, written memos, and attorneys refusing to sign a dismissal they believed violated every principle they were sworn to uphold. A mass resignation from a federal corruption case is not routine. In the architecture of the federal justice system, especially inside the public integrity section, that's the equivalent of a fire alarm. So when Durbin asks why this case moved forward over the objections of the very prosecutors who built it, he isn't looking for a department policy answer. He wants to know why a case that career professionals believed should have gone to trial suddenly evaporated the moment political objectives entered the room. You can feel Bove retreating into procedural phrasing, policy reasons, leadership determination, appropriate to dismiss. That's the kind of language officials use when they want to answer without actually stepping onto the terrain of accountability. But Durbin keeps dragging the conversation back to the terrain itself, the resignations, the implications, the appearance of coercion, the internal meeting where dozens of DOJ attorneys reportedly heard things that pushed them to the edge of walking out. And then Durbin does something that changes the tone of the room. He reads from Bove's own words, from a memo issued after after the 2024 election, where the department described January 6 prosecutions as a grave national injustice. He holds up that document like a mirror, and in that mirror, you can suddenly see a contradiction Bove can't escape. How can someone call January 6 a domestic terrorism event in writing in a national publication, and then call the prosecution of those events an injustice? That contradiction matters because it's the bridge connecting two worlds, the Adams case and the firings of prosecutors who worked on January 6. Durbin isn't just suggesting Bove had political motives. He's arguing that Bove treated the justice system like a series of levers. If prosecutors didn't align with the priorities of the administration, those levers were pulled. If a mayor needed incentive to cooperate with immigration enforcement, another lever was pulled. If dissenting attorneys refused to sign off, they were replaced. At one point, Durbin's tone shifts. It stops being about partisan disagreement and becomes about institutional trauma. He talks about the message this sends to Americans, that people who assault officers during a national crisis can be pardoned wholesale, that prosecutors who enforce the law against them can lose their careers, that legal standards can be overwritten by political objectives. And the room feels it. Because this isn't about a single decision or a single case. It's about whether Americans can trust the system that claims to operate independently of political influence, a system that, when functioning properly, should be insulated from loyalty tests, ideological purges, and reward structures tied to obedience. That's why Durbin presses on the pardons, on what message it sends, on whether Bove can acknowledge even the basic civic principle that violence against officers in service of a political outcome is unacceptable. And Bove falls back again into neutrality. That's political, I can't take a position, the president has exclusive discretion. His answers sound like a legal firewall, not a moral one. And that's the deeper lesson embedded in this exchange, the tension between constitutional authority, like the pardon power, and public trust. Just because a president can do something doesn't mean it strengthens democracy when he does. And when those decisions appear to serve allies, silence critics, or reshape the justice system in favor of loyalty rather than law, the cost isn't measured in headlines, it's measured in the erosion of institutional legitimacy. Durbin's final point lands like a gavel. These were not abstractions. These were people, prosecutors, agents, public servants, who lost their jobs because they followed the law rather than the politics. And if the people who enforce the law can be punished for doing their jobs, then the law becomes nothing more than a tool wielded by whoever controls the machinery. This hearing wasn't about a nominee. It was about the soul of the Justice Department, and whether that soul is still intact. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the DOJ should ever dismiss cases for political reasons? And what message does that send for the future? Let me know. This is a conversation the country needs.